Today we will be looking at a case from the very start of the 20th century, so sit back as we go to Australia. On the 7th of February 1854, a ship from Germany docked in Adelaide, South Australia. Among the passengers were the Schippan family, consisting of Mr. Martin Schippan, his wife Anna, and their two young boys, 5-year-old Martin and 3-year-old Mathis. After a 4-month journey, the Schippans settled in the Barossa Valley region, eventually settling in the locality of Twitter, which is about 70 miles from Adelaide. The family came from Germany, but they were actually Wendish, a culture characterised by a rich heritage of Slavic traditions, language, music and customs. Like many immigrants who came to Australia from Germany in the 1850s, Martin and Anna Schippan established a farm within a close-knit community centred around the Lutheran faith. They worked alongside fellow settlers who shared their values and relied on the church for both worship and social gatherings. However, tragedy struck when soon after arriving in South Australia, Anna died. This had a profound effect on Martin, who turned to drinking as a means of coping with his grief. The once vibrant and hopeful man became increasingly withdrawn and despondent, struggling to find solace in the wake of his devastating personal loss. Both boys helped on the farm and grew into hard-working and responsible young men. They're adept at handling the demands of rural life and contributing to the family's livelihood. In 1874, Mathis, who was now 24 years old, began courting a lady named Johanna Louise Elizabeth Dont. Like Mathis, Johanna had also come to Australia as a child, after spending her first 10 years in Prussia. The courtship was quite short, and they married on the 23rd of July 1874 at the Lutheran Chapel in Eden Valley, before starting their new life together in Twitter. Life was good for them, and they seemed to find contentment in the simplicity of their daily routines. Over the next few years, Johanna gave birth to 7 children. The first, Pauline Augusta, was born in 1875. Next came Maria, known to everyone as Mary. She was followed by Carl Friedrich, Hendrik Johann, and August Wilhelm, who was better known as Gustav. Next came Wilhelm Johann, and their last child was Johanna Elizabeth, affectionately known as Bertha. Mathis Schippan was a stern and disciplined man, deeply devoted to his family's welfare and dedicated to his farm. He expected his children to contribute and uphold strong moral values. However, his temper and demanding nature occasionally caused tensions within the family. In 1896, he was arrested and charged with shooting with intent and causing grievous bodily harm to Carl August Hartwig, a 20-year-old who lived on a nearby farm. During the trial, which began on the 11th of August, it was alleged that Mr. Schippan was provoked by Carl Hartwig and 3 other teenage boys. He then, in a fit of rage, shot the young man in the left leg, between the knee and the ankle. However, despite the serious accusations, when all the evidence was heard, the jury deliberated for only 10 minutes before delivering a verdict of not guilty. Following his time in court, Matthias Schippan became increasingly reclusive, channeling all his energy and focus into his farm. The trial and the subsequent public scrutiny seemed to have had a profound impact on him, leading him to withdraw from social interactions. In 1899, another tragedy struck the Schippan family. Pauline Schippan, Mathis and Johanna's eldest child, fell seriously ill with pneumonia. Despite efforts to care for her, her condition worsened. On the 6th of December, she died at the young age of 24. Pauline's death was a devastating blow to the family, and they struggled to cope with their loss. As the months passed, the 2 eldest boys, Carl and Hendrik, found work on farms away from Twitter and left the family home. The girls, Mary and Bertha, started working for a fruit-preserving factory named Smith & Sons, while 18-year-old Gustav and 15-year-old Wilhelm assisted their father on the farm. At the end of December 1901, Mathis and Johanna travelled to Eden Valley, a small town in the Barossa Ranges, about 20 kilometres from Twitter. They planned to stay there for a few days, leaving behind their 4 children that lived at home to look after the house and the farm. This arrangement was not unusual, as Mr. and Mrs. Schippan often left them in charge for short periods. They were accustomed to handling farm duties in their parents' absence, demonstrating a strong sense of responsibility and capability. That year, Mathis had started building a new house for the family. He also constructed new farm buildings, including a tin shed behind the house, where Gustav and Wilhelm would usually sleep. On the morning of the 1st of January, Gustav rose early and went hunting, while his brother and 2 sisters remained at home. He successfully shot several parrots and returned by 8 a.m, just in time for breakfast. He spent the rest of the day tending to the sheep. His brother also spent much of the afternoon away from the house, and they both returned around the same time. After having something to eat, their sisters went to bed. The 2 boys, exhausted from their day's work, retired to the tin shed and quickly fell asleep. However, just a few hours later, the boys were startled awake by screams coming from the main house. While they tried to make sense of what was going on, Mary suddenly appeared. She was visibly shaken and told her brothers that she had been awakened by a sensation of a heavy weight on her chest. She said that when she opened her eyes, she saw a man looming over her. Although finding it difficult to speak, she went on to say how she had begun to struggle, desperate to get out of the man's grip, and while doing so, she had her head slammed into something in the room. Now breathing quite heavily, she added that during the altercation, she heard something fall on the floor. The distinct metallic clink of an object made her believe it was a knife. She then said that as the man turned his attention to trying to find the object, she fled. She told her brothers that they could not go back into the house, as she feared that the intruder was still inside. Instead, she told them that they needed to run to the nearest neighbour for help. Gustav quickly got up and ran the 1 kilometre to the house of Mr. Henk, leaving Mary and Wilhelm in the sheds. However, when Mr. Henk opened his door and Gustav told him that there was a strange man in their house, he just shrugged his shoulders and told him that it was probably only someone playing a trick. He then said that if they really needed assistance, they should fetch the constable. Gustav ran back to the shed where Mary and Wilhelm were waiting. Although quite afraid, the 3 of them went over to the house. Cautiously they lit the lamp and could make out that there was blood on the kitchen floor. But they could not see Bertha. They shouted her name, but received no reply. The bedroom door was closed, and they were scared to open it. Now frightened, the 3 of them went to the house of Mr. Lambert, the local constable, and asked him to come at once. When Constable Lambert reached the Schippan home, he cautiously went inside. He opened the bedroom door and was met with a gruesome sight. Lying on the floor in a pool of blood was 13-year-old Bertha Schippan. It was instantly clear how she had died. Her throat had been cut. Knowing that there was nothing more he could do at that hour, Constable Lambert took Mary and the boys back to his home for the night. When the sun rose on the 2nd of January, he passed the news on to Constable Mowbray, who then sent a telegram to the police commissioner informing him of the incident. Word was sent to Mathis and Johanna Schippan, and they immediately set off home. The following day, Bertha was laid to rest at the Sedan cemetery. As word spread about the callous murder of a young girl, public outrage grew, and the authorities faced mounting pressure to solve the mystery and bring the perpetrator to justice. The heinous crime committed against such a young and vulnerable girl had shocked the community. The police enlisted the help of a renowned native Australian tracker, considered the best in his field. Despite finding no evidence of any stranger near the Schippan property, he did identify Mr. Mathis Schippan's footprints, which he determined to be no more than 2 days old. However, the police dismissed this finding, as they knew that at the time, Mr. Schippan was 20 kilometres away, at a relative's house in Flaxman's Valley. On the 9th of January, Mr. J. Mulligan, the local coroner, arrived to conduct an examination into Bertha's murder. He meticulously inspected the scene, gathering crucial evidence. His findings were then presented to a jury of 6 men, who formed part of an official inquest into the crime. The jury was responsible for examining the evidence and helping to determine the circumstances surrounding Bertha's tragic death. The coroner told the inquest that Bertha died due to a cut to her throat, and it was his opinion that she would have died within seconds of receiving the fatal cut. He said that the young girl was covered in various scrapes and abrasions, which suggested that she had valiantly tried to defend herself. He advised that 2 knives were found inside the home, as was a bowl of water that contained a slight trace of blood. In the kitchen, a blood-soaked towel was discovered, which had some hair upon it. This was significant because when Mary was examined following the fateful murder, it was clear that she had been involved in an altercation. She had a bruise on her right shoulder, scrapes on her elbows, and scratches across the upper portion of her right arm. Her knuckles and legs were also bruised. Mary had been wearing a pink blouse and a blue skirt, which was scrutinised in great detail. Curiously, several bloodstains were found on the skirts. During the inquest, Mary confirmed that she had another blouse that was blue, and this was important, as a blood-stained blue cuff and sleeve fragment had been discovered beneath Bertha's body, yet that was all that was found. No other part of the blue blouse was ever located. Additionally, there were inconsistencies regarding Mary's hair. When she had been examined by the doctor, he noted that her hair had very recently been washed. This seemed strange, as it was confirmed that she had not washed her hair while staying at Constable Lambert's residence. These discrepancies led to further questions. How did Mary get blood on her if she hadn't been near Bertha that night? And where and when did she wash her hair? Could this all have been an attempt to conceal evidence? The timing and circumstances seemed suspicious, raising doubts about her actions and intentions, and some suggested that she might have been trying to hide something. The authorities pressed Mary and her family about the bloodstains, but they maintained that these were only present, as Mary had been helping with the slaughtering of the sheep earlier in the week. Constable Lambert told the inquest that there had been no signs that anyone had forced entry into the house, and Gustav Schippan confirmed that when out on the farm on the 1st of January, he had not seen any strangers about. However, it was stated that after the constable had found the poor dead girl, he just locked the door and returned with the 3 Schippan children to his house, leaving the crime scene unprotected and unwatched. It was suggested that the perpetrator may have been able to return to the property to conceal any traces of the crime, and important evidence might have been removed. The jury carefully considered all the evidence presented, especially the physical evidence, which included Mary's injuries and the bloodstains on her clothes. After an hour of deliberation, they reached a conclusion. They handed the verdict to Mr. Mulligan, asserting that it was their opinion that it was in fact Mary Schippan, and not a stranger, who had murdered Bertha. The verdict stunned the courtroom into profound silence, leaving everyone momentarily speechless. Spectators exchanged bewildered glances, but their murmurs and whispers were conspicuously absent. Mary sat emotionless, her face devoid of any reaction. However, a few moments later she began to sob, her fate now in the hands of the legal system. She was taken into custody and would stand trial for Bertha's murder. The community, already shaken by the brutal crime, was now gripped by the revelation that the young lady was accused of killing her own sister. The case was already sensational, but now became a media frenzy. Newspapers across South Australia published detailed accounts of the investigation, the inquest, and the jury's decision. The notion of a sister accused of such a heinous act captivated the public's imagination, and the story was widely covered, sparking intense debates and discussions in households across Australia. The impending trial promised to be a dramatic and emotionally charged event. It highlighted not only the tragic loss of a young life, but also the complexities of family relationships and the quest for justice in a tight-knit community. The trial would scrutinise every aspect of the Schippan family's life, laying bare their private sorrows and struggles to the scrutiny of the public and the press alike. Mary's trial began in March 1902. It was held in Adelaide and lasted 6 days. Mary was represented by Sir Josiah Simon, a gentleman who was considered one of the best barristers in South Australia. A neighbour of the Schippans had helped pay the fee, but money wasn't his only motivator. He believed that his client was innocent of the crime for which she had been charged, and was convinced that the true perpetrator was in fact a man named Gustav Nietzsche, a 21-year-old labourer who had been conducting an improper relationship with Mary. Gustav Nietzsche had been interviewed by Detective Fraser following the murder, and when in court repeated much of the statement that he had given at the time. He said that he had been keeping company with Mary for about 12 months, and that he was at the Schippan farm on the Sunday before New Year's Day. He said, "I came on Sunday afternoon, and only Mary was home. Mr. and Mrs. Schippan were away over the hills." He added that when Bertha returned home that day, she was with him and Mary for a while in the kitchen, and he jokingly asked her if she would like to go to town with him. When asked how Bertha replied, he said that she told him to ask Mary, and then she went to bed, and that he never saw her alive again. When challenged about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, he said that he was in the house of Mr. Schvanevelt in Carrington Street in Adelaide. This in fact was confirmed by Mr. Schvanevelt, who told the court that he had employed the young man to take a wagon from Sedan to Adelaide on the 31st of December 1901. He added that he saw him again at different times during the following day, and again at 9 and 11 p.m. He also said that he saw him again on both the 2nd and the 3rd of January. This meant that if Mr. Nitschke was in Adelaide, he could not have killed Bertha Schippan. Despite having a seemingly solid alibi for the night of the murder, which had been heard by everyone in court, Sir Josiah Simon still somehow managed to cast suspicion on Gustav Nitschke. He convincingly argued that not only had the young man treated Mary poorly, but also driven a wedge between the two sisters. He skillfully manipulated the evidence to create a compelling narrative that cast significant doubt on the young man's character and motives. He even highlighted that Mr. Nitschke was engaged to another young woman from a wealthier family, presenting her as a far better prospect for marriage. These intricate details and personal grievances painted a vivid picture of his potential to commit such an act, which somehow managed to overshadow the strength of his alibi. When all the evidence had been heard, the jury was sent out to deliberate. They spent 2 hours going over what they heard, before returning with their verdict. They found the defendant, Miss Mary Schippan, not guilty. Her family and supporters nodded in approval, and Mary glanced at her barrister and offered a warm smile, silently conveying her gratitude and relief. However, she was deeply affected by the ordeal, and after the trial she returned to the farm, but rarely ventured out. Instead, she lived as a recluse, shunning the community and retreating into solitude. Despite there never being any concrete evidence linking Gustav Nitschke to the crime, following the trial, and under the weight of extreme public scrutiny and suspicion, he decided to change his name and relocate far from Twitter. His departure was an attempt to escape the shadow of the accusations and rebuild his life away from the place where his reputation had been so tarnished. In 1919, Mary's life took a further tragic turn when she contracted tuberculosis. By July of that same year, she succumbed to the illness, passing away in the care of her mother and her brother Gustav. Her death marked the quiet end of a life, overshadowed by sorrow and isolation. Over 100 years later, the question still lingers: who killed Bertha Schippan? Did her older sister snap that night, or did an intruder sneak inside and turn the quiet family home into a house of horrors? Some believe that the person responsible was in fact Mathis Schippan. He had a reputation for having a terrible temper, and it is said that Bertha had threatened to expose him as he had murdered a local peddler who had visited their home to sell goods and became a bit too friendly with Mrs. Schippan. But how could Mathis have committed the murder if he was away with his wife? There are claims that he got up that night, rode on horseback down from Eden Valley, cut Bertha's throat, and rode back again. It was said that one of the Schippan horses was still wet with perspiration in the morning following the murder, while the other remained dry. However, many familiar with the area argue that it would have been impossible for Mathis to cover such a distance and then return again over such rough terrain in the middle of the night. The Schippan family continued living in their house for a few years, but the weight of their daughter's tragic murder grew too heavy. In 1908, they made the decision to relocate to the small village of Light Pass. In 1911, Mathis Schippan died, and there are rumours that he confessed to the crime on his deathbed, but these claims remained unverified and speculative. Meanwhile, many who have studied the case in detail believe that Mary Schippan got away with murder. Their analysis of the evidence and circumstances surrounding the incident leads them to suspect that Mary, rather than Mathis or an unknown intruder, was a true perpetrator of this heinous act. The debate, however, continues, and the true identity of Bertha Schippan's killer remains shrouded in mystery. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next brief case.